Harold, let me start off by thanking you for agreeing to do this video interview with me today. For our viewing audience, can you please give us your name and your background and tell us about your association with this professional society?
My name's Harold Stolovitch, and I am an emeritus professor of human learning and performance. We can just simply say workplace learning and performance to make it simple. And I've been at this, in a sense, all my life. I started working when I was extremely young and have always pulled together two pieces. For me, learning and work were always related. And all during my educational period, I worked. And while I worked, I was always anxious and excited about all the things I learned. So it was only natural that I should turn the two together. I've had a background in teaching, first of all, as I taught little children in my early days when I just graduated from university, and then went on to work overseas. I spent 5 years in Africa working to help develop a learning and performance type system there. And then when I came back to the US, I continued doing graduate work and eventually became a faculty member at the world's largest French university, Université de Montréal in Montreal, and headed the instructional and performance technology specialties and programs there, their graduate programs. I did a stint as the Associate Dean of Research. With respect to my relationship with HPT, while I was a student at Indiana University, one of our professors, Sivasailam Tyagarajan, also known as Tyagi, invited students to come along with him to Washington, D.C. in 1975 to a conference of NSPI, the National Society for, and I'm leaving a blank because it used to be programmed instruction and had recently become performance in instruction. And there, 6 students piled into his little car. We all slept on mattresses on the floor in his room and got involved and were bitten. One of the most exciting things was that the luminaries in our field, the people who had written articles that we were studying or books that we were using in our studies, were at the conference, and people like Susan Markle and Bill Detterline and Joe Harless and Thomas Gilbert, all of these people, Robert Mager, were just so exciting to meet, very welcoming, and the upshot of it was that the very next year I had said, gee, we really ought to have a session for newcomers. And so they said, fine, go and organize one. And the very next year, I was running a session for newcomers. So that's how ISPI worked for me, and coming in contact with these people who had spent a long time on what we call the science of learning, and this is really important, the science of learning, had an enormous impact on me. The key thing is that through this exposure, I began to understand that although I was an educator in my heart, and I still am today, that we can learn as much as we want, but if we really want to make a difference, we have to leverage what we know how to do in ways that people value, their organizations value, their customers value, and regulatory agencies and the community and so on. So if I were to define then who I am as part of the human performance technology field, and if somebody says, you know, sort of explain to me, I don't understand, I simply say, look, in any organization, all you have are either products or services, processes, and people. And what I do is to help you have the very best products and services that your customers love and that they value and that the people who produce them value and you value is by looking at what stops them from doing it and what can help them to do it better. And the great thing is that for very little investment, you get a fantastic return. So that would be a very simple way. You know, when people say, so could you sum it up? And I say, yeah, I help engineer the systems that let your people produce that which everyone values. So that would be kind of like my way of, you know, getting into it.
Who, so your first exposure is 75 with Tyagi. Who, in addition, I guess, to Tyagi, who were your major influences, if you were to name a small handful of them?
Well, from a thinking perspective, the most important influences on me were Tom Gilbert and Gary Rumler. Sadly, both have passed away now, but I had the good fortune to spend time with them. And they really gave me a sense of what it is to separate the mythologies that we have from the actual outcomes that we really desire. To put it simply, we believe that if we teach people to do something, that they ought to be able to do it. And we neglect the fact that there are so many environmental influences that either inhibit them or potentially could facilitate it. And that's something that took me a while to really understand until I began to do analyses of the things that I'm doing. So those two were very important. Joe Harless, in his almost, I want to say, Southern preacher type style, hammered into me and others models that were both easy to understand and applicable. And through the examples that he provided, I soon began to see that not only can I make a difference, but there are ways we can do it. Susan Markle, who also recently passed away, alas, was another one of those people who really helped me to understand that you don't need huge amounts of data and casts of thousands in order to understand how people learn and how they transform that into on-job application. And through her simple studies, what she called her N of 1 studies, I began to replicate some of those and extend them. Spent 10 years actually with a research group. We created a research group at our university to extend the type of work that she and others in the area of formative evaluation had done. Tyagi is a mad genius, and the creative elements that he has and that he contributes, I think sometimes people don't realize that Tyagi's particular role in our technology is to, trying to articulate this well, is to think not only out of the box, but out of the planet, and come at things from weird angles, and what seems logical he turns upside down. He's an inspiration in terms of that creativity. I never want from Tyagi, for example, to know systematically how to do things step by step. I don't want to get from him how to do project planning. But if I want a weird thought that will make a difference, and so he's a great inspiration to me and always has been. I mean, I could go on endlessly and name things, you know. If I want to look at engineering, I could go to Guy Wallace and how we engineer systems. If I want to know how we can organize and manage, I can go to Erica Keeps, who not only is an inspiration to me, but also my wife. And I learned so much from her. So all these are, I'm almost afraid not to mention others, but these are probably the ones that come to mind mostly.
Let me shift back to your role in ISBI. You've held a number of positions in the society, elected positions. You've done a lot of volunteering on various committees. You've won the most prestigious awards that the Society has to offer. Please tell us a little bit about your positions in the Society and the awards that the Society has recognized you with.
Oh my God. I have a
well, you're a president.
boxes full of recognition type
Yes.
things, but it's funny how we get recognized at ISPI. Basically, you start off as president and then work backwards. That's kind of funny the way I say it. But I did mention that, when I was a student, in 1975, I finished my PhD then and then went on for another year, sort of like postdoctoral type work at Indiana University. And during that year, the leaders of ISPI encouraged me to create this newcomer thing. They also encouraged me to, present stuff that I was doing and gave me the courage to actually go about doing it. And so soon afterwards, we won a research award,
Mm-hmm.
79.
Mm-hmm.
I was on committees. I think I became a vice president in 1979.
The equivalent of being a director on the board now.
Yeah, and then I found out that the reason I was a vice president was that the vice president organized the conferences, and they figured this kid was, kind of like hardworking kid,
Mm-hmm.
so you got to organize a conference. This is the way things kind of worked. And then with name recognition, I guess, eventually I became, president of the society, and through the research that I've done over the years, won some other things. So, yeah, I've had a lot of opportunity to gain recognition through ISPI and other organizations. But the key thing is that mostly it was do the work, we'll give you the rewards. I mean, hey, it's consistent with our behaviorist background, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after you've done all the things and won all the awards, don't you dare stop, doing work. I think that's the way I would describe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've kind of covered your 30-second elevator speech on HPT and what you do earlier. What would you recommend or suggest to others as they explain what they do? What are some of the things that you would counsel them not to do when they're explaining this thing that we call human performance technology?
Well, I wrote a chapter on the evolution of our field and, tried to explain, how we got to where we were.
Mm-hmm.
And that I won't deal with now, except for one little piece of it, which is that our roots really are learning science. So we need to avow that.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't get away from it. So in our hearts, we still have an affinity toward learning solutions. And that's okay. We acknowledge that we do help people to improve their skills and knowledge. But I would caution anybody in our field when someone comes to us and wants us to do work, or if we are going out, we work within an organization and we have our internal clients, and we see things that are happening, to never, ever name a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say anything. And if someone comes to you and says, oh my goodness, we built this wonderful product, market research has gone out, and they see that there's a need for it, we really can be competitive out there, we've launched it, and now, it's not working, we're not selling. You need to go out and train our salespeople to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
Never, ever say, okay, let's talk about this training or something. You never use the solution. If they say we need an incentive system, never say that. I have 4 simple things. The first is say, tell me more. I can help you solve your problem. That I learned from Joe Harless,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
To set them at ease, but not talking about their solution, only the problem. And I can help you. I'm not going to solve it. Then listen to them and say, hey, tell me more. summarize and say, oh, okay, so this is what's happening. So what would you love to happen? And let them tell you what they would really love. And so in specific detail, based on that, where are we now? And then what would put a smile on your face? What would be success criteria? And what would show you that we met those through the metrics? You know, what kind of measurements can we use? And we walk away saying, hey, I'm going to help you get that. Never, never saying what the solution will be. And then you do your homework and you build an argument for a systemic group of things. That's what the advice I would give.
Let me shift gears a little bit here. Thank you for that. Let me shift gears here a bit and talk about and ask you, where is Harold Stolovitch focused in his learning? What are you trying to learn and master today?
Everything. Now to be more specific. Yeah, the reason for everything is, you know, in 1975, a wonderful French writer by the name of Joël de Rosnay, you have to make it in English, wrote a book called Le Macroscope, or the Macroscope. I would ask any person coming into our field to please read that book, because right at the beginning, it's all about system thinking. And right from the beginning, he says that the scientist works with a microscope, delving ever more deeply into narrower and more narrowly defined areas so that they can control what's going on in order to understand the fundamentals. We, in our field, use the macroscope. In other words, it's like a big, big lens that tries to look at everything and see all the components. So when I said I'm interested in everything, it's because the smallest things can throw us off. To make it simple, if you have, let's say that you're creating an event and you have a wonderful meal that's beautifully prepared, and you have wonderful decor, and you've invited the right guest mix, and everything looks great, but the air conditioning breaks down, and it's a hot day, it can destroy it. And so one simple thing can throw everything off. And that system's view of how all the elements work together to produce an outcome. And the reverse of it, you have a system, it needs something. You bring the innovation into it and nothing changes. In other words, the system simply absorbs it and kind of like compresses it and eradicates it. I personally, what I'm looking at, and my views have changed over time as well. When I originally was doing a lot of research, it was in the area of instructional systems design, because that's what I was interested in when I was a student. But then, as I got more and more into looking at how people perform, I focused my attention on exemplary performers. And there, my inspiration was, of course, Tom Gilbert. And looking at what makes the difference between people who, in the same system, are able to do extraordinary things. And what I found is that they're often ordinary people, but have found ways to use all the elements within the system to get incredibly wonderful outcomes. So I've had the opportunity to work in a number of different environments, whether it's coffee shops like the Starbucks type of coffee shop environment, or in automotive dealerships, or within the military, or within healthcare or finance. What is it that gives the exemplary performance, the performer, that edge? What can we learn that we can feed back into the system? And that means that very often the variables come from all over the place, and putting them together is kind of interesting. That's a major area for me. The other area is exploring what the neurosciences are telling us about people. And My guess is over the next 10, maybe 20 years, the neurosciences are going to guide us with hardcore data on what changes within the human brain take place that will allow us to do things not from speculative points of view, but from hardcore data points of view. So those are areas of great interest to me. And then the other is extending our field of human performance technology to areas that have yet been unexplored. You know, the educational world, where we obviously need to make changes, radical changes in our educational system, to helping immigrants better integrate into society rather than remaining as isolated groups, and having them be able to operate well within a new society into which they come, helping those. And when I did my postdoctoral work, I was looking at those who were intellectually challenged, to be able to help people who have various types of disabilities to be able to perform more independently. And I think that we have the technology that can help them. Again, if you let me just ramble on a little bit more.
Please.
A couple of my PhD students, you know, helped me to extend my horizons. I worked with one of my PhD students on a project in which we were looking at the application of HPT models to decreasing medical emergencies, rehospitalization, and improve quality of life for the chronically ill aged. And there we actually had 3 hospitals. We had a chronically ill aged populations. We were looking at people between 63 and 85. We diagnosed them. We did our analyses of their situations, almost like, you know, front-end analyses. We started off with 120 subjects, and we divided them into 3 groups: those that were prescribed their regimes, both medication and therapies, those who were given educational types of interventions, how to use your medicines and so on, and those who were given, in quotes, an HPT type of intervention, where we looked at a number of variables, including, do they have a taxi to get to a doctor or to the hospital for their therapies? Can they actually open their pill bottles if they have arthritic fingers? Do they have someone who can read the labels to make sure that they can, you know, see what's in the medications and how frequently they should take them, and so on? And that allowed us to make some very interesting discoveries. And the unfortunate part of that study, it was kind of really a sad piece, was that although we saw differences, we did not actually statistically get a significant difference between the educational population and the other population, but that was due to a whole new meaning. In science, when we lose subjects, we talk about subject mortality. This was a whole new meaning to us in subject mortality. And unfortunately, because it was a long study, we lost a lot of our subjects. And then some who, for whatever reasons, just became fearful to continue. That's part of, you know, the aging process. But what we did see were some great trends, and I wish that we could continue those types of studies. We also were able to work with hospices to improve the relationships and the support between staff and patients. We worked with a Bill of Rights for the elderly in assisted living facilities. So these are areas, I think, that have great promise.
Thank you. Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about human performance technology and some of our jargon and terminology. Is there an HPT term that you'd like to define because you think maybe it's been misconstrued over time, or something that's of particular importance to you in terms of some of our terminology?
Sure. I'm going to start by saying we need a jargon, okay?
Yes.
That's so that we can talk to each other. I remember, it was probably 15 years ago, if not more. I had invited a Russian scientist who had moved to the U.S. To visit with me, and he was an expert in the area of algorithmization. And we were sitting in a McDonald's having a cup of coffee, and we were discussing heuristics and algorithms, and we were looking at scientific ways in which we could measure the impact of different variations, and we were looking particularly linguistically at where you have multiple meanings of words like predlegach in Russian and different strategies. And while we were in this deep discussion, somebody turned around from the seats behind us and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Why don't you guys talk English?" And I thought that was humorous. But between ourselves, we need a technical language with hardcore meanings to them. And just as medical people use their terminology to understand one another and be precise, we have to be as well. But now when we talk to our patients, right, our clients and so on, we have to be careful in how we use that terminology. And so we've got to move away from the jargon. We can't just simply say, well, you know, basically what I'm going to be doing is an analysis, a front-end analysis, but I'm going to be using Gilbert's BEM, you know, initially, and then, you know, I think I'll use Watkins' approach to, we can't go about doing that type of thing. And so we have to simplify our language. If there were some terms, you know, you're saying, I would be careful about the word analysis and talk more about a diagnosis, for example, which people understand much better. And I would use analogies a great deal. So if we're going to do a formative evaluation, right?
Yes.
And I heard the other day, I was watching somebody say, well, we're going to do both a formative and a summative evaluation. Thank you for sharing. Oh, and by the way, we're going to probably do some goal-free type stuff as well, you know, to talk about, well, we need to capture information that lets us know how we can make the system work better. And we also want to demonstrate that there is a return on the investment. We need to be able to look at our audiences, judge them, and use the words and jargons that they use. So if we're in a business environment, then we've got to be able to use business terminology with them. And instead of saying, I'm going to do, you know, a prospective ROI, you know, you say, what we're going to do is build a business case to demonstrate what the worth is. We're going to give you, you know, information on the payback period so you know when you'll be getting, you know, a return on your investment. And we'll be looking at how much we can return for the money you put in. You know, if we're talking with an immigrant audience, which sometimes that's particularly in the areas that are outside the work scope, then that too we have to tailor. And if we're working with a fast food chain, then analogies to their processes, which they're very familiar with. So I'm not looking to just make bland, but rather to adapt, use within ourselves a jargon that's very technical, that doesn't have multiple meanings, but very singular types of what we call monosemic meanings. There we go with another jargon term, rather than polysemic term meanings. But then we have to do the same as we adapt to the audiences with which we work.
Thank you. One of the goals of this particular video series here is to begin to capture some of the past of ISPI going back to the NSPI days. And can you share with us some of your favorite memories of back in the day, some of the people that had influence, funny stories things that make some of these bigger names human. Which stories might you have to share with us?
Probably 10 people have told you this. You know, it's the how to, you know, the old guys, the old guard,
the old guard,
right? Lloyd Hummey,
yes.
You know, and Bob Mager and Gabe Ofish, you know, and Bill Detterline and Susan Markle sitting around in a bar and trying to create a program on how to tie a knot in a cherry stem from out of a drink. You know, I think it was out of Manhattan. I never knew which one. You know, whichever one takes the cherry. You know, so I mean, those are funny stories. I think for me, because I wasn't in the first wave,
right?
I was in the second wave, the ones that came after it. I think that, you know, what struck me the most is whenever they were talking, very soon from the funny and social, you know, even having a drink or having a cup of coffee or just sitting around and, you know, shooting the breeze, they would immediately turn to stuff they had done that had a strong database. And there was a lot of discussion about, you know, how they had organized their experiments or their trials and so on. Something I miss here, that it was all about data, and that's disappeared. You know, I find us more ideological these days.
Yes.
You know?
No one stands up from the audience and asks for the data.
That's
anymore.
right. And when you present the data, you know, there's sort of a glazing over, whereas we lapped it up. The other thing, as I said, was approachability. I remember I was in a session with Joe Harless, and he had just finished ranting, which that was his way of presenting.
It was his thing, yeah.
It was the rant, but it was a data-based rant, you know? Very rigorous, and his models were very, you know, strong, and he showed the relationships of the elements, and he was quick to admit when he had screwed up. And, you know, I was still in awe of him. He was a very frightening type of person. And after one of his sessions, I went up to him and I said, you know, that was terrific. You know, I just keep learning from you. And he said, you better remember that, you know, because I'm investing in your education, you know. And he would come to my sessions, and afterwards he would evaluate me. We'd walk out the door, and he would tell me, you know, that was very cute, but it wasn't convincing to me. Oh. You know, you can pull the wool over their eyes, that sort of thing. So that straightforwardness, and Bill Detterline did the same type of thing. The willingness to mentor. They all would take you under their wing if you showed the least bit of information, interest. Sorry, they would be with you and give you advice and let me know how it went. You know, that sort of thing. So those are, you know, it's hard to pinpoint a single story, but I will tell you a single incident that probably was one of the most profound. And that was, I told you I went in 1975 to my very first conference. And I met the very famous Bob Mager there. Yes. Right? I mean, and we were in awe of Bob Mager. He was the rage. Everybody knew his behavioral objectives and so on. And he was redoing his book on preparing objectives. And here I was as a student. I met him, this gaunt, white-haired man. And he said to me, you know, I told him I was a student, and I admired his work and so on. He said, good, come over here. And he had 3 covers that were perspective covers for his new book. And he had them on cardboard. And he said, okay, I'm going to show you these 2. Tell me which of these 2 you prefer. I said, that one. And then he said, okay, I'll take this one. He took another one. He said, between these two and that one. And then he said, okay, now I'm laying out all three. Which ones? And I came up with the same one. And he said, great, you've really helped me in making my decision. And I didn't think much about it until when the book came out and he was thanking people. Among the people he was thanking for helping him in preparing this book was my name. And I was just a student then. You know, so this is the type of wonderful stuff. You know, I could go on endlessly with that.
Do you sense that our society today is still has that kind of accessibility of the thought leaders, the published people, the presenters at the conference, or has that kind of gone away, or is it still there?
Everybody harkens back to the good old days,
yes.
whether they were good or not, right? So let's start with that. You know, the society's changed. In many ways, it's grown more open. It's opened itself up to more and diverse types of interventions and ways of looking at things. That's the good news. The bad news, as I've said to you, is I think that we've gotten away from the rigor of the past. And I'm hoping that that will return. The research base, the rigor, the desire for, or not desire, the demand for data that was present. You know, it didn't matter whether they were in the academic world, like Susan Markle or Phil Tiemann, or they were in the business world, like Joe Harless and Claude Lineberry and Stephanie Jackson. They demanded proof. And that piece I miss. Now, coming back to the approachability, I think it's just as approachable. I don't quite sense that passion that's there that they shared, and that may be my fault because I'm old, you know? But I do hope that somehow or other we regain that in a different way.
Well, Harold, thank you very much for this. Any final words to the viewers about human performance technology and/or ISPI?
Well, the sneeze wasn't part of the final words. You know, it's a great society, and it's like a family. One of the most exciting things is if you take a look at how many ISPI couples there are, it's amazing. I found my wife at ISPI, you know, and how did I do it? I went to a seminar that she gave with Frank Wydra, and I was blown away by the way, this was in the 70s, they had this computerized database for 35 states, tracking competency by competency, the performance, you know, how people performed against a set of standards. We call them competencies, but they have a set of standards for people in the supermarket industry. And they were in 35 states. You know, this is the largest supermarket holding company in North America. And they were so rigorous. The number of people who met and fell in love with what the other person was doing before they fell in love. It was an amazing type of adventure. And, you know, I've never seen it anywhere else but here.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much for all that you do for human performance technology and for our society here.
Okay, thank you very much, Guy.
Thank you.